Hello everyone and welcome to today's Wine Communicators of Australia webinar. I'm Nick Kahn, WCA's Executive Officer. With me here in Adelaide is our Program Manager, Jen Barwick, and online from Sydney is our presenter, Trish Barry from Mastermind Consulting. This session will look at Instagram, which is without a doubt one of the fastest growing social media platforms. In barely 5 years, this mobile photo and video sharing app has become the go-to option for many people wanting to share and consume visual stories. It's shaken up the way marketers and brands think about visual content and marketing to mobile audiences, but perhaps caused some confusion for wineries who aren't quite sure how to use it well and how to fit it into a broader social media strategy. Now that's Trish's bread and butter. She's one of the leading consultants helping wineries and wine brands integrate social media into their marketing and messaging. Today's presentation is, as they say in business circles, pretty data rich. There's a lot of content and a lot to take in, and that means three things. Firstly, I'm going to have a pretty easy day as MC, so I'm off to make a cup of tea. Secondly, you'll be pleased to know that you will receive a PDF copy of Trish's presentation slides, and as always, we're recording the whole session for you to revisit later. And thirdly, we'll keep all your questions to a specific Q&A session at the end of today's webinar rather than taking them as we go, just in case we get sidetracked into an interesting discussion on one issue and don't get through the presentation. But feel free to ask questions as and when you like. Jen will collate them and Trish will answer them as she can at the end. Those we don't get to, we will reply to later. And of course, feel free to talk amongst yourselves and swap ideas using the chat box. There are three ways you can ask questions, as set out on the screen now. You can use the chat box, you can tweet, or you can email Jen. And maybe Instagram should be an option too, and that's probably a question we need to put to Trish later. Before I bring Trish on, just a small technical point. You would have noticed on your screen a reference to some audio problems that we've been having. That's nothing to do with us. It's actually nothing to do with Arcadon, our internet provider and webinar provider. It's their telco, and we all know about telco problems. So if you are finding the audio is not what it should be, and certainly not what you've experienced with our previous webinars, feel free to use that toll-free number and the PIN code. You'll get onto the webinar again very, very quickly, and it won't cost you any money. So with that said, let's get on with it. I'll ask Trish to talk to you about how to leverage Instagram to grow wine brand awareness. Trish?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us, and hopefully you'll get a lot out of this session today. There's certainly a lot to cover. What we've tried to do today is to be able to chunk in as much information as we can to give you some overviews of trends of how consumers are using Instagram, some latest updates around the platform. For those of you who are new to the platform, some tips about how to set yourself up properly, and then to go through and give you some ideas of how you can market your wine brand more effectively on Instagram, some tips for success, some case studies using both wine brands and some from outside the category, and then give you a few tools that are our favourite Instagram tools that you might be able to use as part of your strategy. So let's kick into it. There's a lot to cover. Many of you will have heard in the press that there is a real trend towards visual social media. We're seeing that across the growth of Facebook, through platforms like Pinterest, as well as through the growth of Instagram. Now, Instagram is at the moment a mobile-only platform, and it's one of the fastest growing social media platforms globally. It was bought by Facebook 18 months ago after it launched in 2010, and $1 billion was paid for the platform by Facebook. So they're certainly regarding it as a platform that there's a lot of equity in, and they see there's great growth potential going forward. We're really seeing a growth of users on the platform. So each month there's around 300 million active users, where 70 million posts around Instagram are done daily and about 2.5 billion likes. In Australia, the numbers are a little bit scarce, but we're seeing around 5 million Australians using Instagram, and that has grown by 35% over the last 12 months. Interestingly, when you see a lot of the statistics quoted around users, many of these social media platforms have got a very high concentration of users in America, whereas with Instagram we're actually seeing 70% of users being based outside of the US. So a great opportunity for here in Australia. So what does the average Instagram user in Australia looks like? These slides have come from the Social Media Week presentations that happened earlier in the year, and it's showing that as Australians are getting more active, they're starting to use the program more to follow other profilers. So on average, Australian Instagrammers have around 251 followers, many of which are their family and friends, but they're also starting to branch out into following brands and to get more engaged with brands. So what does the Instagram community look like in Australia? There has very much been a photo-based application to date, and we're seeing more video coming into the platform, but at the moment there's only about a quarter of Australian Instagrammers who are sharing video content. Australian Instagrammers are sharing roughly 7 posts per month on average, or approximately 1 post every 4 days. Less than half of the Australian population are using hashtags in the way that they engage, and we'll talk about the use of hashtags in a moment. But many of the consumers that are using the platform are finding that it's a great way to discover new products and services. On average, the internet population who are using Instagram are following around 6 main different categories. So mostly, as you know, you would use it yourself personally, you're following family and friends, but you're also using the platform to discover beautiful brands and photography, travel-related categories and food-related categories. So it's really been the photography, travel, food and fashion brands that have led the way, but we're starting to see a lot more media partners jump on board and consumers branching across different categories of how they're following brands on Instagram. Interestingly, timing is very important on the platform. So think about how you would use social media. It's in the evening and it's often on the weekend when people are most active on the platform. So timing of your posts is very important, and we're finding that in the evenings, so weekdays 8 p.m. is often the peak usage in Australia, and some days at around 5 p.m. So you've finished your week, you've engaged and done some great things over the weekend. You've often captured those snaps on your cameras, and now's the opportunity to upload to the platform and tell people what you're up to. So as you're kind of starting out, think about this. This is an opportunity for wine brands to jump on board a platform that's very much growing, and there's a real appetite for visual content to be shared. It's also an opportunity to connect with a new audience, as many of the people using Instagram are a younger demographic, so there's a chance for us to be able to tell our stories and to engage with them in a way that's quite meaningful, in a way to tell a visual story. But timing, as I just mentioned, is very important. So it's not necessarily about posting throughout the day, although that could work for certain brands. But it's a matter of thinking about how we evolve to use the platform and think about it from the eyes of our consumer. Like any social media platform, it continues to evolve, and there's new platform updates that we continue to see coming to the forefront. The biggest change that has happened over the last few weeks that was announced last week is that Instagram is now getting around to monetizing the platform. So at the moment, you may have seen some brands starting to advertise on Instagram, and the restriction up until now has been brands with a minimum of about $50,000 in their advertising spend. Last week, Facebook and Instagram announced that the platform is being opened for everyone, and you'll start to be able to buy ads through Instagram through the Facebook ad platform. They've also opened up the API to a number of other advertising partners, so partners like Salesforce or Ambush, where you can buy other ad inventory. You'll also soon be able to start to buy your Instagram ads. Now, as a user, that's not necessarily something that we all like to see, but the same thing happened on Facebook. And we've got to understand that this is a publicly listed entity, and when you've paid $1 billion for a platform like Instagram, the owners are going to look for some returns. And that's certainly looking like it's going to happen. When you have a look at some of the media commentary and the analyst predictions, there's some really strong growth that has been forecasted around the financial positions of Instagram. So eMarketer, one of the leading marketing sources, predicts that Instagram is on track to generate $595 million worth of revenue this financial year, and their expectation that is in the next 2 years, Instagram could possibly surpass Google and Twitter in terms of US mobile display advertising revenue. So it is something that's coming. It's something that we need to think about as wineries, and we need to start to think about how we can allocate a little bit of budget in terms of the media mix to make sure that our messages are getting heard as the platform continues to grow. So here's a couple of examples. If you're having a look through your feed, you may have seen some of these ads rolling out. There's 3 different ad formats at the moment. So we're seeing video ads being rolled out, we're seeing photo ads, and we're also seeing the carousel ads where you can slide through and see a number of different photos in the way that the ads are appearing. We're also starting to see more calls to action. So this is something that has rolled out through Facebook, recognising that for brands, they need a strong consumer call to action to engage with the brands and to help to monetize the platform. This is something that we're seeing happening on Instagram at the moment. It was announced in early June that these action buttons are being tested, and over the next 6 months they will start to roll out over the platform. So it gives us the opportunity to think about things like signing people up for our e-newsletters or installing different apps, or potentially also having that Shop Now button as we're promoting different products. How that will work is very much early days, but it's definitely something to think about as you're planning for your marketing. Instagram is also making sure that they're upgrading their what we call native tools. So once the platform started on the early days, there was a whole heap of different apps that were being launched to be able to improve the user experience on Instagram. So there were different apps that you could be able to have video content, and you could have different filters over the way that your picture appeared. Instagram wants to take control of that, and they're starting to buy or build the functionality within their own platform to make it a better user experience. So I'd encourage you to continue to download the latest version of the app from the App Store and just continue to refresh the app, because what we're seeing is the ability to choose the layout, to edit, to be able to flip images, to do a lot of the things that the external apps were doing in the early days of the platform, and they're now integrating that within the user experience for Instagram. Bigger images are also coming as well. So this is something also that has been released over the last few weeks. The Instagram resolution, as we currently know it, is an image that's about 640 by 640 resolution. We will move to a greater size, and we will start to see those visuals having much greater impact. There's also some really exciting initiatives around the search functionality that's being rolled out. So you'll have the ability, when you have a look on the places, when you're searching, you can either search through top people, you can search by people, you can search by different hashtags. There's now the ability to also search by places. So you could type in the word Hunter Valley, or you could type in the Yarra Valley, and you can start to understand who's interacting with your brand or who's interacting with the region, and then start to be able to have conversations with people who are in a specific geographic location. And I think that's something that's exciting from a tourism perspective. So a couple of other fast fun facts, I guess you could say. This is talking about how brands are using the platform. Because from a branded community, I think there's a really big opportunity for us to start to leverage this in the early days and start to tell our stories. Interestingly, from a brand perspective, and we'll cover this in a little bit more detail over the next few slides, when you have a look at the top brands on Instagram, the majority of those brands are including at least one hashtag in their posts. Instagram as a platform is also driving incredible engagement per follower. So we're seeing 58 times more engagement per follower than Facebook and 120 times more engagement per follower than Twitter. Now you could also argue that's I guess part of the fact is that there's very little ads on the platform, and so there's not a lot of clutter happening at the moment. But we will start to see that as we're growing and as brands are starting to get involved, we're seeing really good engagement with the consumers. I've just noticed there Christina's comment about who are the top brands on Instagram. I will give you a link that I'll post up in terms of an Interbrand study that has been done looking at the top companies and how those brands are using Instagram, and that'll be a really good platform for you to read and have a look at how bigger brands, some of the top ASX and the top S&P 100 companies are engaging on Instagram. So starting out, this is a mobile platform, so if you're not on Instagram at the moment, it's something that you need to download onto your mobile phone, as it's very much a mobile-based platform. And when you're starting out, make sure that you've got the basics. This is your chance to tell the people who are engaging exactly who you are. So we call the Instagram handle as the name of the brand, and then you have the opportunity to upload a profile picture, to name your account, and to make sure that you describe the account so that people know a little bit about your brand, potentially what region you're coming from, and to be able to put your URL there so that people can come back to your website. Okay, so once you're set up, then it's a matter of thinking about how you tell your stories. So we're going to talk in the next couple of slides around how do we market more effectively on Instagram and some tools and tips to be able to think about to start on your brand journey. Now, like any social media platform, the content comes back to the story that you're trying to tell. And the first place I would encourage you to think about is why are you on the platform and what stories are you trying to tell? Are you trying to make your personality of your brand come to life? Are you trying to tell some products about your services, your staff, your customers? Stopping and thinking about the why to begin with is really important for success. And one of the ways to help you be found, just the same as it is on platforms like Twitter, is being able to use hashtags to find your followers. So hashtags are your way of being discovered by consumers when they're looking for certain pieces of content or they're following a theme. So if they're looking for Aussie wine and you are including the hashtag Aussie wine, that will mean if a consumer is looking for Great Australian wines, that will help you be discovered on that feed. When you're attending events, making sure that you're looking about, is there a hashtag? Are people following that event? How can I make sure that my content is being discovered? Is the way that you need to start thinking about using hashtags. So some popular hashtags to think around the wine and food category. Tourism Australia's initiative around See Australia that they're pulling from a tourism perspective, and their Restaurant Australia campaign are a really good way of thinking about using hashtags if you're talking about your region, or if you're talking about your wine and food combination, using Restaurant Australia as a hashtag, as that's what Tourism Australia are aggregating from when they're looking at the campaigns that they're running in a broader market context. Aussie wine is a good one to use. Insta wine is one. Insta food is one around food. If you're talking about a certain varietal, potentially using that varietal. If you're talking about your region, if you're talking from the Hunter Valley, using the hashtag Hunter Valley. So think about what people are going to be searching for. Think about the content that might be relevant, and that's how you determine what hashtags you're using in the feed. You will also see a whole heap of people often putting lots and lots of hashtags in their feed, and I would just encourage you to use the rule of what's relevant. People don't want to feel like they're being spammed with hashtags, so think about what is relevant to your brand, your stories, and potentially your category, and use what's relevant rather than using too many hashtags as you kind of build up your following. So yes, there is a little bit of a science behind the way that you market on Instagram, but it's nothing of the rocket science. There are some very simple tools to think about of how you start to be able to give a good experience the way that you market your brand. So think about this as a great way of being able to give some behind-the-scenes access. So don't necessarily post the same content that you would post on Facebook or on other social media. Facebook might be a great way for an event to be able to put the post-event activity. So you might have a great wine club dinner and you might put those Facebook photos up on Facebook at the end of the event. This is a great opportunity to start to tell the story in real time. So you may be able to do some photos as you're setting up or throughout the event, or as you're kind of leveraging a broader theme. So you could be setting up for an event like Pinot Palooza. Tell the behind-the-scenes stories and give people that immediate feel. But make sure that you're adding value to the stories. So think about the commentary and be authentic for your brand. There's also a number of filters, and a filter on Instagram is a way of being able to make your photos, I guess, look a little bit more premium or have a different look. So there's a number of different filters that you can use, and I'd encourage you to experiment with them and see what impact it has. You'll see that most brands will use no filter as the most popular choice, so they'll take the photo on their phone and they'll post that exact photo. But Instagram absolutely loves the filters, and it's often a good way to be able to enhance the way that the photo gets shown. So by all means, have a bit of a play with the filters, and we'll talk in a moment about how you can measure that, but there's definitely ways that you can start to understand how people are engaging with the different filters to make your sort of content come to life. Now, one of the common complaints around Instagram is the fact that there is no call to click. So when you're posting a photo and you might be talking about your product, you can't currently click from those comments back to your website. The way that many brands are getting around it at the moment is being able to put that link into your bio. So instead of it being your website that you put, you might be featuring a new wine release, or you might be featuring an event. And in the comments, the way that many brands are getting around it is to say, click the link in my bio to be able to find out more. If you're doing that, obviously make sure that you are putting the link in your bio, but you can change that, and you can use tools like Bitly, which is the link shortener, to also give you some analytics around how many people are clicking on that content, how many people are engaging with my post, and what sort of responses am I getting from Instagram. It will give you some great analytics around the platform to be able to understand just how your brands are performing and what sort of things you can do. One of the most common things that I see being breached on Instagram, and I think it's something that we need to be aware of, is the discussion around copyright. So there are very tight legal policies around Instagram, like there are on any other platform. And Instagram is very much saying the buck stops with those who uploads an image, and they are making sure that they have no liability of the photos that are uploaded onto the site. So if you don't have permission, or if you're pulling content from the internet that you don't own those rights, it may be something that, you know, is becoming more commonplace in social media to see, but it also exposes you to copyright laws. So think about the way that you can make sure that you're referencing. If you're taking user-generated content, have the courtesy to go out there and ask for permission. Or the way some brands are doing it, and the Australia Tourism account is a really good way to be able to see how they've done that. Just make a comment in your profile description. So if you want to be able to use the user-generated content, say things like Tag Australia, See Australia, Restaurant Australia to give us permission to repost. If you want to take it that little step further, go and have a look at the Jetstar example. Jetstar makes it very clear in their terms and conditions, and they link you back to their social media policy, making it very clear of what content they're going to use on the site. It's also a great way if you're going to use some user-generated content to go back and form a relationship with the person that posted about your brand. So saying something as simple as, we love that photo, wondering if we can have your permission to reuse that content on our feed. Another local example, one of Mastermind's clients is Best, so it just gives you a bit of an example here. They're aggregating content from around the web and encourage people to use the hashtag BestWines, but they're making sure that in their description when they set up that they're saying, this is what we're going to repost from, and if you'd like to repost around our brand, this is what we'd like you to do, and then they have a social media policy on their website that makes it very clear of what the policy is and what content they will be leveraging. So that covers setting you up and making sure that there's some marketing tips in here. Let's have a look now around a few common things to think about as to how you would start to plan the content on your page. And like any successful social media content, this all comes back to thinking about the sort of feeds that you're going to be able to publish. And when you talk to some of the Instagrammers who have got massive followings, they're very conscious around the feed and what the feed of images would have a look like. What stories does it tell in terms of my Instagram feed? And I encourage you to take a step back with the sorts of photos that you're posting and think like a magazine editor would. So if someone from Gourmet Traveller was going to post on their feed, they're questioning what is part of our editorial guidelines, what story does this image tell, how does it help to reinforce our brand. It's exactly the same for wineries, and flip the switch and start to think about what story does this picture tell about my brand. How is this helping to solve a problem? How is this giving some really good content to the people who are following me versus how am I just talking about myself? The more value that you can add in the way that you position your content and the way that you think about how the pictures and the feed are constructed, the more success that you're going to have on the platform. So think about how you can be creative in the way that you bring some of your images to life. There's some really good tools. One of my favourite at the moment is an app called Giant Square, and it helps to give your feed a bit of a creative look. Test some things out, see what's relevant, and then make sure that it's very much around your brand identity. Video is also the fastest growing platform on many of these social media platforms. And all you have to do is start to think about the role of video to be able to tell your story. So you have the ability to be able to upload up to a 15-second video on Instagram, and think about how that's going to help to tell your story rather than just uploading the video as it stands. Think about how you can have a better cover photo, how that will help to tell a story. Choose the frame that you want to feature. If you want to step it up a notch, potentially play around with some of your phone's camera features. This is a really good way to be able to build the stories around your brand and give people the chance to get to know the personality. There's also some really good tools that we'll talk about when we get to the toolkit around how you can use platforms like Hyperlapse, which is a really great time-lapse app, to be able to tell your story. So if you're setting up for an event or if you're running a tasting, Hyperlapse is a really good way to be able to capture some of that video content and bring that to life. So once upon a time, we were really seeing Instagram dominated by brands that were leading fashion brands, but we're starting to see even the big brands are getting it in terms of how they can start to use content to build their stories. So this is an example from Sunrise on 7, and the circles on the page represent images that have been regrammed. So Karina, I saw your note there in terms of, is regramming okay? It's absolutely okay as long as you're making reference to where it's being regrammed from. So my best tip would be don't regram something or take a photo without making a credit. And if you're going to regram it, use the hashtag regram or make it very clear of where the photo has come from. And we're seeing many brands delve into their consumer content and start to use that user-generated content as part of their stories around the brand. I've seen a picture of how do you regram come from Sue there. That's something that we'll cover in some tools at the end, but there's a couple of ways brands can do it. You either take a photo of the image that you want to do, or there's some apps like the Regram app or the Repost app that are all free apps that you can use, and you can then load in your content and make sure that people are seeing what sort of images you're sharing in a very easy way. So let's have a look at some case studies and see some brands that are doing it really well on the platform. One of the places that I go for inspiration and to see what brands are doing best is often some of the fashion brands. So brands like Topshop and Zappos do a really good job of obviously telling their stories on the platform. We also see a number of great food brands. So I would encourage you to go and follow some of the big retailers and some of these brands on Instagram and just get a feel of the sorts of content. What does their feed look like? What sorts of behind-the-scenes stories are they telling? And use that as inspiration to be able to help to build, your following and to delve into your strategy. Zappos is a great example of how they're using competitions and user-generated content and being able to leverage themes much broader than what their shopping experience is about. I also love the story about brands that have started from nothing and have really grown their Instagram following by being very strategic about the stories. And I was at the ProBlogger event last weekend and the guys who started Simple Green Smoothies were there. And they've talked about how they spread the love. They call it spreading their leafy love about their Instagram account, which is all about Simple Green Smoothies. And they started to find that they were being very useful and engaging very much with their community to grow their brand. And they're now at the point that they have over 375,000 followers. And they have 2 professional photographers that they now use. But they talked about how this started off on their iPhones, building the stories, talking about how you can make your content look really good. And if you're not using platforms like Canva, which is a visual design tool, it's a free app that you can use to be able to make your photos look better. It's a great one to be able to look at, to be able to put some of those tips and the stories and some text over the images, to download that to your computer and then to potentially upload that through your platform to make your visuals look much stronger. That's called Canva, C-A-N-V-A, and they've just introduced a Canva for Work, which is a really good way to show some of these stories and make your visuals look much stronger. Another Instagram example that's quoted quite widely as a pioneer is the Instagram case study around IKEA. The Vimeo link of how they did that is actually included on this slide. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that video, have a look at what they've done. And they virtually created a website of all of their products through Instagram, and they engaged their consumers. It's something that can easily be done on a smaller scale, so don't be scared about it just being IKEA. Think about how you can use the concept of people engaging with their products and how you can then translate that back to your winery. Another great example that I love to talk about is the yogurt Chobani. And what's great about this case study is that these guys had a very good understanding of their consumer, and they did a lot of listening before they actually approached Instagram as a brand. They were starting to see the trends that their yogurts were being included in a lot of Instagram posts, and they loved the fact that people were using their content to be able to talk about recipes using their yogurts. So even before they joined Instagram, they saw what their fans were posting and they listened first, and then they started to create their content strategy with the sorts of content that their consumers were doing in mind. They created a hashtag creation a day, and what they start to do is to have a look at what sort of creations people are putting out there with their products and starting to incorporate that into the way that their posts are featured. And now you start to see content that's being uploaded on the platform that's very much driven by the users, and the users can engage much more actively with the sorts of content that they're featuring. Interestingly, another great example, a meal startup company that was launched over just 2 years ago. So these guys make sure that their images are very much about mouth-watering, pictures of their food. They started a very successful hashtag called Plated Pics, where they're very much asking people to take photos of what they've created with the meals. And this Plated Pictures hashtag feed is now something that they leverage for user-generated content to help to tell the stories around how their products are brought to life. So we've touched on a few brands there that are outside of the wine category. Now I want to just talk to you about what ways we as wineries can start to engage more on Instagram. Now for many wineries that I follow, and I follow a lot just to kind of keep an eye on what's going on and what wineries are doing, and something that I observe is that for many of the brands that I follow, the feed is all about their product. They're not telling a story. They're not having any thought about the sorts of visuals that are being used. And they're not thinking about how we can use this content to tell new stories. So if you talk to people in the food categories or in some of those other more popular categories on Instagram, the people are saying we're stopping and we're thinking about how we create the image. What story am I telling, and what is the purpose? They're not just taking a photo of their wine and throwing it out there on the platform. They're thinking about how they can be more useful. They're thinking about what does the photo look like? Can I take that on different angles? And what will that tell? And I think there's some real learnings in that for how it will resonate with wineries, and a few simple things that we can do to have a much better experience. There's some really great wine-related content being shared on Instagram, and some people from the Australian wine community who are doing a really good job of building a very active community. So Joe from Once Upon a Wine, he's been very active on the platform. He's now got nearly 60,000 followers on his Instagram account. He's mixing up the sorts of content that he's using, and the same applies to the guys from the Wine Wankers. They've got a following of nearly 46,000 people. They're telling stories, they're mixing up the sorts of photos that are on the feed, and they're making a really big effort to connect with their audience. So you often post on their feed and you comment on those photos. They're acknowledging that as part of the community. They're reaching out to people. They're searching for people who are looking for wine-related content, and then they're starting to engage, and that's how they're building a very quick community. There's also some great examples, some of my other favourites in terms of brands I love that are doing great things. The Wine Gallery, which is an online wine store out of Australia. They've got a mix of beautiful photos and some great quotes, but you can see from their feed that it's very much planned. There's a great photo. There's a visual style to what they're doing. There's some quotes. There's some things that are on brand, and you really start to know what you to come to expect when you follow that account on Instagram. The Cheese and Wine Company, also another great example. There's very strong content that they're featuring on the feed, but you know what to expect and what sorts of things are going to come. Some great content from some wineries in Australia. Just looking at two from Victoria, the guys from Best really try and focus on the sorts of stories that they're telling, give people behind the scenes, talk about some of the customers that are visiting, and start to tell the personality of the brand. The guys at Mitchell Harris, I think, do a really good job. They talk about what's going on in their region, sharing photos that are not just about their wine brand. They're telling stories about where they're visiting. Other wineries doing a great job. Go and check out what Crinklewood are doing. Wynns does a good job. There's, plenty of great examples, and I think the opportunity for us now as wineries is to start to get much more active in how we engage and to start to build the followers. Don't just post up on the platform and assume that people are going to come. So a couple of tips to think about. When you're posting your content, make sure that you're telling a story as part of your post so that the reader can relate and they can encourage your thoughts. The Simply Measured study, which I'll send you the link to in a moment, was a Q4 Instagram study that had a look at the top brands on Instagram. And what they found as part of that study was that there was no statistical significance between the caption length and the type of engagement that you found. So that don't be scared of having to keep it short the way that you might engage on Twitter. Use the fact that you've got some great space there to tell the story about your brand. Tourism Australia constantly talks about the fact that they're looking for stories to relay. So when you're posting about Restaurant Australia or Sea Australia, they're looking for content that they can share and they want to help to tell the stories. So use the fact that you've got some great content as part of your post to tell people where you are, why the vineyard might be significant, why the customer might be significant, and help them understand more than this is just a great photo. Now, I'm no professional photographer, but think about the composition of your photo. Test things out and see what different angles you might be able to take. Ask yourself, rather than taking the photo of the bottle shot that's straight on, can you take it on an angle? Can you take it from the top? Can you put some props into the photo to be able to make it tell a story? If you're taking a photo around food and wine, how do you set the scene a little bit better to make that more appetizing? There's lots of little things that you can do to just think about the composition of the photo and how that will then appear in people's feed. Also think about the sorts of content that your audience will love and use that to tell a story. So this is a great example from the guys at Scarborough, thinking about the latest addition to the Scarborough wine family. We know how much our consumers love the pets that we have, and particularly dogs. Use them as part of the content, get people involved and use it to build the personality of your brand, and you'll start to find that as your community grows, people will start coming back and asking questions like, how's Scrappy the dog? Or we love the fact that this part of your content stream is part of the way that you continue to evolve your story. Another tip is to think about how you highlight your customers to put the brand in context. So this is an example from Piper Heidsieck where they were at North Bondi Fish. So their content is around featuring their customer and telling the story about one of their customers in an environment that is, about their product, but it's not all about their glass of champagne. So featuring things like, we will let you in on an insider secret, North Bondi Fish, and they're referencing and, making sure they're making reference of that customer Instagram account. They're telling the story about where it is. So it overlooks the beach. It's owned by Chef Matt Moran. It's casual dining. Head on down and enjoy some delicious salt and pepper squid. So maybe that's the opportunity to be working with your trade partners or your great restaurants that you're working with to help to tell your stories. So that's just a couple of tips. Let's just recap on thinking about what we've just talked about. So think about putting your winery product in a situational context. Don't just show the bottle shot. Start to tell a story. If you've got great food around it, if you're having it in your cellar door, start to think about it like a magazine editor and put the product in a situational context to make it more appealing. Start to tell it from a storytelling perspective. So what is the background to what you're trying to do? How can you use your customers, your stockists, to be able to link to their profiles and also to start to build their businesses? How do you mix up the types of content that you're featuring? See what works best and be able to analyse that performance. How can you leverage some user-generated content, so content coming from your cellar door or in the events that you're doing, and get people to share their stories with your brand to grow the awareness. Think about the composition of your photos. Style it with some basic props to make it more visually appealing. One of the things that I see really often for wineries is that you're out drinking other wines, and that's okay, but if you're going to be posting about other wines on your winery brand feed, put the story and context back with your own winery, or if it's not relevant, if you're drinking wines that are not related, set up your own personal account and start to tell those stories of what you're drinking from your personal account, not necessarily coming across from the winery. Really think about how you build your community, and those brands that have been successful in wine as well as outside of the category are those that are caring most about their customers. So comment, like on other people's content, and be useful. And most importantly, be consistent and patient. This isn't the platform at the moment where it's going to happen overnight. There are obviously, ways that people find that they're growing very quickly, and some people have some success, overnight. But generally, this is something that you need to be patient and think about social media as about relationship building, and it's going to take some time to start to build and engage in that following. So think about here are some useful tools. There's plenty of tools out there, and I'll write a blog post with some more useful tools, but these are some of my favourites to start to think about how you can grow your Instagram following and improve your feed. The biggest tool that I would encourage you to think about is making sure that you've got a good camera, not necessarily taking all of the photos on an iPhone or on a mobile phone. A good camera will help to tell a visual story, and many of the brands that you hear about how they've had success have gone out and bought a good professional camera, or there's some great cameras at the moment that are Wi-Fi enabled that you can take that photo on your great photo and then sync them through to your iPhone or your mobile phone to be able to use. If you don't have a good camera, or you're thinking about how you can then use that, one of the other good tools that I find is Dropbox. So put your professional photos in a Dropbox folder, download the Dropbox app onto your mobile phone, and then you can download the professional photos that you might have taken around your brand, have them on your camera phone roll, and then you can start to use that as part of your feed. One of the apps that I find is really good for reposting is this Repost app, and there's a number of them out there. This one has just had a couple of enhancements where you don't see that it is reposted on the image now. You can just have the straight image being reposted, and you basically go onto the Repost app, take the photo, and then share that photo over to Instagram where you're logged in as your brand page, and it automatically transfers the comments around that photo over to your Instagram account so that you can easily repost. Photogram is an app that I find is really handy for managing multiple accounts. So I often use Photogram for checking feeds with my own personal account versus the business account. Commenting and switching between the accounts is where Photogram will be really useful. Hyperlapse is also an app that is owned by Instagram, and this is a fun app to be able to test out, to be able to tell a time-lapse story. So you might be picking a vineyard, or you might be able to have a tractor going down the road. It's a great way to be able to capture that in slow motion and then speed it up from your phone to be able to post and get that very quick, fast motion happening on your feed. Schedugram is also an app that I use a little bit to be able to post at relevant times. So when we started, we talked about how evenings and weekends about 5 p.m. was a really good time when consumers are on Instagram. And yet it's often really hard for us as brands to make sure that we're remembering to do that. Schedugram and Hootsuite is also now allowing you to schedule for Instagram. So I'd encourage you to think about testing out some of the tools. They are quite cost effective, and think about how you can test out different times of day to see how people are responding to that content. Iconosquare is also a really good platform that we use to help to drive strategy. There are some different versions, but there's a paid version of Iconosquare, and you basically sign in with your Instagram account and it will tell you who your new followers are, who's unfollowed you, what your most popular post is, what filters are working well. It gives you the analytics to start to understand what is working well and what's not to drive your strategy forward. And Vintank is also another good wine-related social listing platform if you've not come across it before. And what this is really good for being able to do is to make sure that you're capturing and listening to any comments on your wine brand. So many of the wineries we work with will jump onto Vintank of a morning. They'll see the feed of all of their brand mentions across multiple social media channels, and it'll help you to listen and to respond. So instead of having to jump onto Twitter and jump onto Facebook and jump onto Instagram and see who's checking in at your Instagram location, it's roughly about $75 a month, but it makes it much easier to make sure that you're capturing the conversations around your brand. So that's a lot that we've covered today. I hope that there's been some value. Let's just recap on some of the core messages for you to think about. Instagram is one of the fastest growing social media platforms, and it's a massive opportunity for wine brands to start to build an audience, particularly a younger audience that can connect and discover your brand. But like any social media platform, the content matters. So think like a magazine editor. Think about your feed. Think about how you can tell a visual story and start to plan out the type of content. If you're using tools like Schedugram, it may be that you have a content calendar where you can start to think about what's coming up in the winery. How do you craft images? Use tools like Canva to be able to make sure that your images are beautiful, and then start to tell the stories in a much richer way. Think about the user-generated content, look at other categories for inspiration, and start to use the tools that are available to you. But there is no magic formula. Test, analyze, and see what works best for you, and use that analytics to guide your future success. Remember, like any social media platform, this is about building a community. So it's not a forum to sell. This is something to be useful, put your brand in context, build a community, and then people will fall in love with your brand and come back to buy. So that's kind of, that's it for in terms of what we want to cover. I'm sure that there's some questions in here that Ben's sending through.
There are indeed, Trish. Thank you for that. I promised everyone a pretty heavy and full presentation. That was certainly it. And I've never been quiet for so long when I've had a license to speak. So I found it fascinating. I particularly liked your comments about the value of setting up material for the likes of Tourism Australia to share, and that they're desperately looking for content. There are 2 or 3 questions. Let's bring across to them. Someone asked, how is engagement judged? You made the comment that engagement for Instagram was in some place, I think, 58% higher than Facebook. How do you judge what that engagement actually is?
They have a look at the Instagram in terms of, they have a look at engagement as who is liking, who is commenting, who is interacting with your brand. It's how engagement is measured. And keep in mind that most people that will look at your feed are innocent observers. So it's only a very small amount of people who will actually comment and post across any social media platform. It's kind of those high-end junkies that love to use the platforms. So when they have a look at who's using Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, it's those consumers who are much more active and tagging people in the content and sharing that content as how they're looking at engagement.
Thanks. A good comment here from Rebecca. I think you mentioned the importance of being aware of things like copyright. She also speaks of ABAC, the Alcohol Beverages Advertising Code. I guess it's very easy when you're doing something like Instagram to forget there are regulations around alcohol.
Yeah, and I guess that's something with Facebook, we can age gate our posts, and if you're not doing that, making sure that you've got your Facebook settings to content that is alcohol related is really important. That's the challenge for us on Instagram at the moment, that we can't choose who is seeing our feed. So that's even more reason why I would say when we're consulting to make sure that you're saying use it responsibly for persons over 18 and to drive the consumer back to your website where there's a social media policy in place. Go and have a look at brands like Moët and Chandon. They're a great example of how they make sure that they're making it as clear as possible in their profile description that this content is for persons over 18 years of age. There's not a lot more that we can do about it at the moment because we can't age gate the platform, and the minimum age for Instagram is technically 13. So it's something to be very aware of and making sure that we're acting responsibly where possible.
Another question, is it a good idea to utilise a personal account as well as a company account?
I would say absolutely. I mean, the company account would tell a different story to what you are from a personal account. Sometimes the content can be similar, but I would say, you know, and your staff, encourage your staff to have their own personal accounts and encourage them to use the hashtag around your brand. That could be a great way of drawing content from your staff members to be able to aggregate over to the official page, but I would make sure that you're thinking about the difference between a personal Instagram account and a business, the same as you would on Facebook to have a business page and a personal page.
A question just comes through from Karina Wright. There are many shopping Insta apps using PayPal. Are we limited with alcohol and how we can use them?
Yeah, look, I have seen and we have had a look at some of the Instagram apps using PayPal at the moment. The challenge is, yes, you can use them, but it does make it quite difficult from an alcohol brand. The feedback I'm giving to some of our wineries is just wait for a little bit longer, because if we're going to be able to do shopping and those things through the API of Instagram, they will make sure that you can age gate where that purchase is coming from. So it's a bit of a grey territory at the moment. There are ways that you can click on some of the links and a whole heap of shopping platforms that you can leverage, but some of them have got some restrictions around alcohol that I think we need to be responsible around, and that's why, you know, we're not doing it that way. I've just seen Pippa's question here about one global brand account versus multiple regional specific accounts. I think it really depends there around the content that you've got to share. I've seen it for some big brands like the champagne brands that have got one global account. And the challenge that I see happening there is that the content is not necessarily relevant to that region. So they're posting at the moment about how beautiful it is lying on the beach, and it's the middle of winter in Australia. You know, if you can find a way, obviously, to make sure that that content is relevant, think about that. But at the moment, you can't post by location. So it's a bit of a tricky one. I would think about the content, and if you feel that the content is strong enough to be global, do it that way. But if you think that there's a need to tell a local story, set up a local account.
Trish, we're nearly out of time. Can I ask you one more open-ended question? Instagram is clearly good. Is there something already waiting in the wings to take its place?
There's always something new taking its place, and there's always something that's new kind of coming. I would say to think about, you know, what platforms are right for your brand, and focus on a couple of them well, and don't be necessarily swayed by the new kid on the block. Many of the brands, I think, have had a look at Instagram and said, is it the new kid on the block? And my answer to that would be, no way. This is something that is here to stay. But think about your time. Think about the platform that you've got. Snapchat, you know, is getting some great coverage in terms of how engaged people are. There's a number of other platforms, but don't get distracted by the new shiny toys would be my advice. Think about what platforms are right, what resources you have, what stories that you have to tell, and then choose the platforms that work for you best.
I think we know Instagram's established when it's not a new shiny toy. Trish, thank you. Fabulous presentation. I hope everyone got a lot out of it. I think one of the strongest webinars we've had for a long time on a very topical area, and that's what we're always trying to do. Thank you again for your time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We don't have a webinar next month. We've had 2 in August. We're taking a break in September, though we are preparing our media marketing workshop for our special winery members. But we'll be with you again in October for our annual webinar with WSET focusing on education issues. Last year we had something like 300 people logging in from 10 different countries, so it's a really interesting session. Hope you can join us. On the screen now you can see information about Mastermind Consulting and Trish and her Mastermind musings, and of course you can always go to our website to find out what we're doing. So thank you again for joining us. Look forward to you joining us for our next webinar. Goodbye.